You know, some of the sweetest words you're ever going to hear are when a prospect says, "Can you get me a quote on that?" Well, of course, like everything else in life, quoting is a lot more involved than it appears at first. So let's talk about the quoting process. Welcome to episode 11 of The Cheeky Sales Coach. So, what is quoting? Well, quite simply, and of course, quote has to be the word of the day. A quote is a proposal that lays out the products and services that will be exchanged for a specific amount of money. Well, that's easy. Well, it seems easy, but like everything else, there are 6 or 7 things you need to know about quoting. The first thing you need to know, quoting is a process. So, unless you are the absolute exception to the rule, here's the way the world works. You start by saying, here's what we want to do, and now let's negotiate from there. In other words, quoting is a process because it has to be something that's iterative, which simply means we're going to do the same thing again and again and again, right? So the things that you're going to do, the things that make it iterative, start with collecting information and then figuring out how you can give value. The result of those things is going to be a proposal for a specific list of things to be delivered and a price that's associated with that. Now, why is this iterative? Why don't you just say, well, a window costs $247 plus installation of $399, boom, there you're done. Well, people say, well, that seems a little bit cheap to me. Are you sure this is a quality window? What if I get double pane? What if I get aluminum frame? What if I get something that can be opened and closed? Is this adjustable? Right? Well, you didn't tell me that you wanted all that stuff, right? So you gather more information and you get a better quote that is a better fit for the client. And then the client says, oh, well now you've got a window that costs $972, an installation that costs $853. That's way more than I was willing to spend. So why don't we go down from there? Okay, so okay, how do you want to negotiate? And there's lots of ways of doing that. But the point is, thing number one, it's a process. It is the beginning of a negotiation. So it's very rare that somebody says, give me a quote, they get a quote, and then they get a check. That does happen, trust me. It always makes me feel happy when it happens. And then I think, did I leave money on the table? Thing number two, the more information you have before you start, the faster the process is going to go and the more accurate it's going to be. Just think about it. If you know exactly what the client wants before you get started, and you know what they need, and you know what their problems are, and you know how you can solve them, well, if you've got all the information, you can get a quote that really, really fits what the client needs. So information is powerful. The problem is, it's really hard to get buyers to give you information. The most important information for some people is the price. So the problem is buyers don't want to give you a price because they think, and they're probably right, you'll take all their money, right? If they say, well, my limit is $5,000, guess what? They get a bunch of quotes for $4,997. But if they say, well, my budget is $2,000, well, then they get a lot of quotes for $1,999. So the concern from the prospect's point of view, and remember, we had an earlier video, buyers are liars, they're concerned that if they tell you how much they have to spend, you're going to spend it all. That's probably not the case, but here's the thing that every seller knows. There is a $5,000 solution, a $3,000 solution, a $1,000 solution for many, many problems. And so part of the discussion of price is what can you afford, right? Think about a house, right? That's such a great example. Do you need 4,000 square feet? Do you need 2,000 square feet? Do you need 1,000 square feet? Those are going to give you some pretty good ideas of how much house you can buy, and that will give you an idea of what it's going to cost. You are not going to buy a 4,000 square foot house for $150,000 pretty much anywhere in America. So, right, you have to be realistic. There really is a relationship. But there's an awful lot of houses you can buy all over America for $150,000. So if that's your market, well then be realistic about that. Anyway, point number 2 is information is absolutely essential. So the more information you gather, the better. Those who have a lengthy sales process where you sit down with the client and you ask lots of questions and you open your ears and you get lots of information are going to be more accurate the first time they quote something. There's still going to be a negotiation process, but at least you'll have saved a lot of time by gathering information before you got started. Thing number 3, it helps a lot if you can have an anchor price. So an anchor price is simply a place to start the discussion. Think about that house once again. If you've never bought a house and you have no idea how much houses cost, you might go out and say, well, I need a nice little 3-bedroom, 2-bath situation. How much is that? And then somebody says, well, you're looking in Beverly Hills, so the price is $2.3 million. And you're like, okay, maybe not quite that. But you didn't have any idea that you were in that ballpark. So you're like, okay, so what can I buy? Well, it turns out, if you want to be in that neighborhood, you can't buy anything. So you say, well, I think I can afford so much per month. Okay. Oh, that gives the real estate agent some kind of idea of the ballpark of what you can actually afford. Now, if they had come to you and said, oh, well, you're in Average Town, USA, you can get that house for $200,000. You'd say, wow, okay, well, maybe I can afford a little bit more, or maybe I can afford a little bit less. But in either case, that anchor price gives you a place to start the discussion. Earlier, I talked about windows. Windows can literally be as cheap as a few $100s and as expensive as many, many thousands of dollars. So the question is, remember our discussion about how much does a bottle of water cost? Well, this is a similar kind of thing. How much does a window cost? Once you start looking at things, you need to determine an anchor so that both you and the prospect agree on the ballpark you're looking at. I sell technologies, and I can tell you there are servers that really honestly only cost $2,000. There are servers that really honestly only cost $10,000. There are servers that really honestly only cost $250,000. So when you say you want a server, you haven't helped me very much at all, right? I need to know the information. I need to know what your needs are. I need to be able to get some idea of what the requirements are and what your budget is. And so anchoring the price in a place where we can both look at it and make some movement goes a long ways. Number 4, you got to do the background work. What does that mean? Well, background work is trying to find out what are the options? What are the hardware options, software options, labor options? What's the timing, right? There's lots of things that need to be gathered up, and those things are all information. So whatever the process is, you should have either a quoting system, an Excel spreadsheet, something that allows you to gather this information and make notes. Remember, all the background information that changes is going to affect the price. So if people want it sooner, that costs more. People want it bigger, that costs more. People want something that's higher quality or that's going to last longer or that gets installed in a certain way, right? All of those things affect the price. You also need to know things that you probably already know, but what are the materials that are required? How many of these, how many of those, how much labor is required to do this or that? All of those things conspire to affect the price. So collecting all that background information is key. And this is where having a process matters a lot. Part of having a process is writing down that information, cataloging it, having it at your fingerprints or your fingertips, either one. The point is, the faster you can get that proposal out to a client, the faster you're going to be able to make a sale. And part of what has to happen is you got to gather that background information as efficiently as possible. If a whole bunch of background information only changes once a quarter or once a year, that makes it easier for you to record it and keep that information. Never create a new process unless there isn't already a process in place. It's much better to fix an existing process than to start over every time. Number 5 is somewhat related to background information, but basically number 5 is options matter. When you go to the prospect and you say, well, you said you wanted one of those, but it looks like we have to have 2, that's going to change the price. You said you wanted to do this, but really what we're going to end up doing is that's going to change the price. So the background information allows you to create options for the client. Options are important because, remember, all of this involves a negotiation process. At one iteration or another, you're going to go back to the client and say, here's the deal. We can build this many, many ways. If you choose option A, you get this price. If you choose option B, you get that price. Again, cataloging options allows you to create standardized offerings. This speeds up the quoting process going forward because you're going to be able to say, first time out, option A is this, option B is that, option C is that, or of course we can customize this for your needs. The more you have standardized options and standardized bundles, the more sales you'll make and the faster you'll make those sales. So that turnover allows you to actually bring in more revenue in the long run. Number 6 is super duper important. Number 6 is actually presenting the proposal to the prospect. And some people, again, they want to make it easy. Well, it's not easy. First of all, you should never, ever, ever present your proposal to somebody who can't say yes. If you make your proposal to somebody who can't say yes, for example, an office manager or a project manager who can only gather information, take it to the decision maker, well, they have the ability to filter your information. They have the ability to translate from your language to their language, and that translation never works. So the bottom line is, if the person you're talking to can only say no and can't say yes, you're talking to the wrong person. How will you make your presentation? Will it be in a slide deck? Will you do a PowerPoint slide? Will you have a printed out piece of paper? I highly, highly, highly recommend that if it's possible in any way to avoid sending something to a client, avoid sending something to the client. You should present it in person or in a Zoom meeting or in a conference call or on the phone or something so that you can present your proposal in your terms at your pace. A truly great book that you should look at is Question-Based Selling. One of the things you're going to find in that book is a really great process that basically lays out a formula that says, here's the problem you had, here are the options you had, here's the solution that we propose, see how it fixes your problem and it addresses these other issues, and it's beautiful, and here's the deal. And you know that if you could have done this yourself, you would have, so you need somebody who's awesome to take care of this for you. Guess what? We're right here and we'll be happy to make your life better. Right? So that's a little bit simplified, but you get the point. there's a process of making the proposal. If you just send somebody an email that's got a PowerPoint attached to it, or it's got a PDF attached to it, you know what they're going to do? They're going to do exactly what you would do. Open it up, look at the bottom line, go, I can't believe they want to charge me that much. And then they're going to open the next email, and they're going to look at the next bottom line. The important thing about the whole quotation process is that it is a process that begins with information, and it should end with the solution of the client's problem. And if you do that, then you can be in a completely different ballpark than your competition, because they're solving a different problem. That's why their price is different. They are solving more or less of the client's problems. That's why their price is different. They might be higher and solve more problems. They might be lower, solve fewer problems. It's highly unlikely that they will be solving all exactly the same problems as you and have a dramatically higher or lower price. If it's too much lower, then you know that they're basically lying to the client. That's another story. We'll talk about that sometime, because sellers are sometimes liars too. Let's be honest about that. But the bottom line is, you have to make a presentation, and it should be orderly and it should be structured. And it should go through all of the steps of laying out the information that you gathered, the conclusions that you drew, how you have framed the client's problem, and how you're going to solve it. It's very important in this iterative process, in this negotiation, that there is a moment when the client agrees that you understand the problem. And then you can solve that problem, and there's a price for that solution. So when you make that presentation, it should be very intentional, and at the end of it, you ask the big question. So can I have your business? And finally, number 7, you have to convert a quote into an order. I'm assuming you won the sale, right? So what happens is, what was a proposal, what was a quote for service, has now been turned into a check, which is going to be deposited into your company's bank. And now you have to figure out how to convert that into an order. So now this is where we go all the way back to number 4, background. All that background information that you gathered up, that's things like, how many people will this take? How many hours will this take? What's the lag time for getting equipment on site, right? So forth and so on. All those details, you should know them, you should have them, they should be written down. And now all you have to do is convert your quote into a service ticket. And now deliverables become pieces of that service ticket. I know sometimes the world just seems really complicated, but hang in there, create a process that you can repeat again and again and again, and I promise you, you'll make a lot of sales. For the Cheeky Sales Coach, this is Karl Palachuk, wishing you the best of luck in everything you do. Call to action. Like, subscribe, and ring that bell so you won't miss a thing.